What's up guys, my name is Ace, and the Battlefield 6 beta is now over officially, unfortunately. So the long wait begins until the game actually launches, and in today's video, I wanted to share my final beta review and feedback. Keeping in mind, some of the things on this list will be stuff that I talked about in my initial impressions, because my impressions on those just didn't change. So there will be some overlap, but I will be going into far more detail with this final review video. And I say review, but this is more so going to be a feedback video, because when it comes to the good stuff, it's pretty easy to just list out that I really did enjoy my time with this game, despite some of the issues that were taking place. Some of the highlights for me were the general vibes and graphics and aesthetic to the game. Most of the gunplay I thought was quite good. I've got a few little gripes that we'll be talking about here, but overall the gunplay was solid. Same thing with movement, it was good overall with some bugginess and some issues maybe here or there. And another thing that might be a little bit unpopular, I liked the maps for the most part. However, I do think they probably should have gone with showing us a bit more variety throughout the beta, and it did feel like it was missing some truly large-scale map experiences that's a bit more traditional to Battlefield. I did have a lot of fun with these smaller and more chaotic maps, but I would have loved to play some bigger experiences as well, which we know are coming at launch. So to be clear, even though the rest of this video is basically going to be providing feedback and talking about some negatives, I had an absolute blast with this. I put quite a bit of time into the beta. I made sure I used a lot of variety. I maxed out all of the guns in the beta, and I'm feeling very optimistic about this game overall. So with that out of the way, let's dive into the things that I think are pretty much just objectively bad, or it seems there's at least pretty much unanimous agreement within the community with these things that I also was not a fan of and think could use some work. The first thing that I talked about in my initial impressions, the user interface and the settings navigation was awful. One of the worst experiences ever, just navigating settings and setting up controller settings, for instance. So I really hope they streamline things, organize things a lot better as well into tabs, perhaps prevent some redundancy. I noticed several settings were showing up in multiple different tabs, and that just creates confusion when you're trying to remember how to get back to that setting, or when you change that setting but then you stumble across that same setting in a different tab, you're wondering if that's actually the same setting or something else is going on there. Additionally, just the way that you navigate it, like when you go into one of the tabs, like the controller tab for instance, and then you want to go back and select a different one of those tabs, you would think pressing the back button would do that. No, that takes you right out of the settings menu all the way back to the main menu. It's just really unintuitive, really awkward to try to navigate. I also think with the number of settings that we have available, which I appreciate, I like the fact that there are a lot of settings. I think they just need to be organized better, and I would love to see a search bar in our settings so we can search for a specific setting if we want to go that route. After that, one of the big things that absolutely needs to be fixed, thankfully the developers have acknowledged this, so I suspect this will be taken care of for launch. This is the aim down sight spread or bloom bug that I shared a couple days ago, where if a slide gets interrupted at the right moment, you get locked into a maximum spread state, and there's no indicator letting you know what your current amount of spread is going to be when aiming down sights. And this means even if you're playing things flawlessly and you run into this bug, you're standing still, you're tap firing, you could even go prone and tap fire your gun, which should be perfectly accurate. Instead, it'll be wildly inaccurate, and that just left a big question in my mind the whole time I was playing. Will my gun actually shoot where I'm aiming when I pull the trigger? And that should never be a question in your mind in an FPS game. While it is a fairly edge case bug, it is a very serious issue to even have something like that exists, because it destroys confidence in the gunplay. So obviously we'll have to wait to see. Like I said, the developers have now acknowledged this, so I suspect it'll be taken care of before launch. But of course, we'll have to keep an eye out on that one. Next up, something that plagued the second weekend of the beta on the Siege of Cairo, as well as a little bit on Liberation Peak, was people getting into unintended locations on the map. And Cairo was a big one. People were getting on rooftops all over the map, and it absolutely harmed the general flow of the map compared to the first weekend when people didn't know how to get up into those locations. But with Liberation Peak as well, this one's a little bit less obvious. I'm not sure if they intended snipers to turn into mountain goats and get into certain spots, but it definitely felt on the second weekend when people knew how to get into all of these crazy locations that it just significantly harmed the pacing and the flow of that map as well. As for the next one, a big complaint throughout the beta, and something I experienced on and off, was the experience time to kill versus time to die. So this is a netcode related issue where it just seems like you get instantly deleted by full auto guns. Like somebody shoots you 5 times and you die, but on your end, it felt like you died in either 1 or 2 bullets. Whereas on your screen, when you're shooting at other players, it obviously doesn't feel like you're killing them in 2 bullets because you're not killing them in 2 bullets. and sometimes it felt like it took longer to kill than it should based on the range and damage of your weapon. So I do hope they collected a lot of valuable data when it comes to that, and they can make the appropriate adjustments for launch, because that is a very frustrating experience when that's hitting you really bad. Next, let's talk about spawns a little bit, and I'm obviously not talking about squad spawns here, because if you get a bad spawn while squad spawning, that's kind of on you for not assessing the situation properly. I'm talking about the spawns where you select one of the points that your team controls, for instance, and it spawns you out in the open and sometimes directly in the line of sight of enemy players, with really no time to react or get to cover. In my eyes, if you're selecting one of those spawns, it should be finding you a safe location to spawn. I don't think those spawn points should even exist right in the middle of a street, for instance, with no cover nearby. Admittedly, this wasn't happening like all the time, but it happened enough throughout the beta that I felt it was worth a mention in today's video. After that, while I said that I generally did like the maps in this game, I do think certain map mode combinations were balanced horribly. Especially in the more linear modes like Breakthrough and Rush. I think they need some serious tweaking because one side would have a massive advantage over the other side. Like Iberian Offensive on the final point of Rush, for instance, the defense has a huge advantage over offense based on where their spawns are relative to the AMCOMs. Or on Liberation Peak, defense has a ridiculously massive advantage over offense. And in my eyes, with a mode like that, it should be a roughly 50-50 chance on offense or defense, assuming the teams were perfectly equal, and then it should be the skill and teamwork of your team that pushes those odds in your favor and allows you to get the win. That's not at all how I felt with many of these map mode combinations. It often felt like it was an 80-20 situation where you could technically win, but you had to be an absolutely dominant force. You had to be so far superior to your enemies just to have a shot at winning. Next up on my list, something I also mentioned in my initial impressions, and if anything, my opinions on this were just strengthened as I continued to play the beta. I really don't like the horrible lighting situation where if you're inside a building looking out, everything is super blown out to the point where you're just blinded and you can't really see much at all, or vice versa. If you're outside looking into a building or coming into a building, it's just pitch black, and it either takes far too long to adjust or it just doesn't adjust at all. I know this is in some ways designed to simulate real life, but this is so far exaggerated to what you would actually experience in real life. And also, it's a video game. We shouldn't be straining our eyes and struggling just to see the world in front of us as we're playing a game. So I don't know how deep that goes and if that's something they can easily tweak and tune, but I hope we see some adjustments there because that was really frustrating. Next up, talking a little bit about movement and bugs relating to movement. Oftentimes I'd find you run into a little bit of geometry and it just launches your character up in the air to varying degrees, sometimes like way up in the air. And while that's kind of hilarious the first few times that it happens, it does also get annoying when you're trying to position yourself effectively and you just launch yourself up in the air. And now you're basically just a clay pigeon for the enemy teams, and there's nothing you can do about it. Additionally, and I think this is related to that, oftentimes in a gunfight, I'd be aiming down sight, and I'd strafe a little bit, and I'd hit some piece of geometry, just a really small piece of geometry, and again, it would kind of launch you, maybe not way up in the air, but it would launch you enough that your sights are wobbling like crazy. And I get it, when strafing, there should be some sight wobble. I'm totally fine with some punishment for that, but I'm talking like an insane amount of wobble as if you just dropped off of like a 20-foot drop. And that's also really annoying to deal with when you're in the middle of a gunfight and you're handling things effectively, but you just randomly hit this pebble on the ground that decides to launch you upwards. This is something where, unfortunately, I couldn't find it again, but I did see a developer reply to one of these clips, and they mentioned that they do have a fix coming for this, so that's good to know. Just wanted to point it out here anyway, though. After that, I did want to mention footstep inconsistency, because a lot of the times I would hear footsteps quite far away, quite easily. They were super crunchy. I knew exactly where that enemy was. I had plenty of time to react. Whereas other times I'd have enemies sprint right up on me and they were full sprinting, and it was even in a reasonably quiet environment and I heard literally nothing from them. And in a game like this with larger maps and more room for players to just be popping up from random locations, footsteps should at the very least be consistent. And I don't believe this was an issue on my end because the sounds just weren't existing in the world. So I don't know if there's just some priority issues there where they're playing other sounds instead of footstep audio, but I definitely noticed a decent amount of inconsistency with that. And then finally for this section that I've got on the objectively bad, like things I think definitely need to get looked at, this is the experience between matchmaking and just matchmaking in general. Now, I don't want to get too deep into the whole server browser talk in today's video because it'll kind of take over the video. I personally wasn't a big fan of matchmaking only throughout the beta. We will have Portal at launch with a server browser, but that'll be a little bit different at least. With this though, I mainly wanted to focus on the between match experience because there were several annoying issues that I had here. It's not game breaking, but it was a consistent annoyance throughout playing the game. The first thing is after a match ends, there's no persistence to that, so it immediately puts you back into matchmaking. And when doing that, that can lead to the situation of playing the same map over and over and over again, and I saw that a lot throughout the beta, which is to be expected when you have a very small map pool like this, but still annoying nonetheless. It can also lead to an inconsistent connection experience from one game to the next because it's putting you on a totally different server. Another thing with this that's just annoying is there's an inconsistent time between matches. And sometimes I immediately tried to go back to the main menu and quit to the main menu, and I didn't even have time to do that. It was already loading into the next match. Now, obviously that's not the end of the world, but it's just frustrating when it's like, I don't want to load the next match up to begin with. I'm just trying to back out to the main menu so I can edit my loadouts, which is another frustrating part of the between match experience. There was no method of editing your loadouts. If you just unlocked a bunch of attachments for the gun you were using, you had to back out to the main menu and try to beat the matchmaking to do that so that you could make adjustments to your class setup, or you wait until the next map loads up and now you're just standing in spawn useless, editing your loadout while the rest of your team is getting their opening route in. So at the very least, I think we should have the ability to access the loadout menu in between matches without having to back out to the main menu. And also on that note of just standing in spawn editing your loadout, I don't like the fact that it automatically spawns you into matches. I think you should have an opportunity to edit your loadout and do all of that without auto spawning in and then select your spawn, because oftentimes when doing that, by the time you are ready to start playing the game after editing your loadout, your team has already captured a point or multiple points, or they're pushed up on the map, and it would make more sense for you to get immediately into the action and be able to spawn not in your team's headquarters way at the back of the map with no vehicles because your team just took all the vehicles. Again, all of these are minor annoyances, but they definitely add up, and it did create an unnecessarily frustrating experience, and I think that experience could be streamlined. Ideally, we would have persistent servers, so you just stay in the same lobby from one match to the next. You have a very consistent timer between those matches, like a 1-minute timer, for instance, and you give access to loadout editing in between those matches. So you would always know that you've got 1 minute to make those adjustments that you need, which is often enough. And then once you start the next match, you don't have to worry about standing in spawn editing your loadout because you've already done that. And you can just get straight into the game, just like everybody else will also be straight into the game. Unfortunately, it's highly unlikely we're going to be getting those persistent servers, but this is just another set of examples of a bunch of little issues that non-persistent servers bring to the game. Those are just the minor issues. There's the major ones as well, but I don't want that to take over this video, like I said. And there we go. That's going to wrap it up for the things that I think are just straight up bad and absolutely need some work. Next, let's move into the more subjective section. These are areas where it's things that I personally wasn't a fan of or think there's room for improvement with, but I could also see people disagreeing with many of the things on this list, and I think that's totally fine. If you do disagree, let me know why in those comments. Most of these are just going to be small nitpicky things in no particular order. And the first one I've got here is the player diamonds that appear above players' heads when you're looking in their general direction. I'm not talking necessarily about spotting mechanics here where another player spots them, but just when you look in the general direction of an enemy, that red diamond pops up above their head. And while I think it's fine to do that, I do think it definitely needs some tuning. The first thing I notice is this will appear through at least like environmental smoke or debris that's floating through the air. I don't think it works through actual smoke grenades, but if something just got demolished, or if there's a fiery part of the map and there's a bunch of smoke coming from that fire, you can just look directly at that smoke, you'll see the diamond through it, and obviously you can just guess where that player is based on that. And I can't count the number of kills I got where I literally never saw the character model of that player. I only saw a diamond, and I'm not gonna not shoot below that diamond to see if I can get the kills. So yeah, I think some tuning is potentially in order there. Next up, a fairly minor thing is I'd like to see some better audible feedback when you successfully revive somebody with a defibrillator. I often found myself having to do a double take just to double check that I actually got that revive on that player and I didn't miss. So more pronounced audible feedback for that would be really nice, not only as an indicator that yes, that actually works so you don't have to do a double take, but also I think it could make defibs a little more satisfying. Those little bits of audio feedback can really go a long way when it comes to how satisfying certain actions feel. And on a very similar note here, I noticed when destroying vehicles, and specifically getting kills on the players that were in the vehicle, we also don't have any distinct audible feedback letting you know that you actually destroyed that vehicle and killed the people inside the vehicle. And I often find myself having to check the heads-up display to make sure like that actually worked, I got it, did I kill the guys? When again, I think a sound cue there could go a long way, not only for information purposes, but also for a sense of satisfaction when getting those kills or vehicle destroys. After that, let's talk about suppression a little bit. In the Battlefield 6 beta, suppressing enemy players would only really impact their healing rate. So it would increase the amount of delay before you automatically start healing. Whereas I know in some older Battlefield games, suppression could affect a whole lot more, even to the point where it would increase your aim down sight spread and cause the player to be inaccurate when shooting in their direction but not hitting them. Which, to be clear, I'm not really a big fan of that. I'm kind of glad that mechanic hasn't come back, just because I think it's awkward that missing shots on target will have the potential to have such a drastic impact on the gunfight. But there's one element of suppression in particular that I would love to see some improvement to, and this is the ability to properly suppress snipers. This was my biggest area of frustration, is depending on the map, of course, it felt like there was a lack of counterplay if an enemy sniper had you pinned down behind a piece of cover. Like if you didn't have a smoke grenade, you could obviously try to make a run for it, you could try to shoot them and pick them off, but more often than not, if you tried to do that, even if you got a couple hits and you were hitting right around them, it didn't seem to have any impact whatsoever on their ability to just headshot you. So I think it would be nice to see some proper suppression ability against sniper rifles, maybe cause a little bit of aim sway if you are suppressing them. Even if this ability only applied to LMGs even, I think that would be totally fine, just to provide a little bit more counterplay to those snipers. And it's not even counterplay in the sense that you're just going to instantly destroy them at longer ranges. You're just causing them to maybe have to take some cover for a second, or you may cause them to miss a shot that they otherwise would have hit. I do think that would create more interesting sniper counterplay. I don't think it would make snipers suddenly extremely weak or anything. It would just give a little bit of agency when trying to fight back against snipers at longer ranges to give you a bit more of a chance, even if it's just a chance to force them to miss a shot so then you can make a move and get out of that position. On that note, I also wouldn't necessarily be opposed to stronger suppression for LMGs across the board, just to give a little bit more power to LMGs and a bit more of a reason to use an LMG over something like an assault rifle or SMG. Next up, something I found quite frustrating is RPGs, specifically the splash damage versus infantry with RPGs. You could shoot an RPG right next to an enemy player, and you would deal either very little damage or sometimes no damage at all, and you would just be suppressing the enemy player. And that just feels really awkward in my eyes. Now, I understand where they were going with this, and it's probably better than the alternative of making them as powerful as they probably should be, realistically, if you were to shoot a rocket next to somebody. Because with Recon, you spawn in with 5 RPG rockets, so that would basically just mean at least 5 free kills, and probably more, because you would often be killing multiple enemies with a single rocket, if it were too powerful. So I'm not necessarily saying it should be so powerful that you can just wipe a squad with a single RPG easily. However, I would like to see at least some more splash damage. So if you hurt an enemy, for instance, and they take some cover and you know they're right behind that piece of cover, I think it's reasonable to be able to consistently finish them off by shooting an RPG behind that piece of cover. Perhaps have a hard cap on it so you can only deal a maximum of like 80 damage with splash damage, and therefore you still have to direct impact them with an RPG in order to kill them when they're at full health. Or perhaps more of a rebalance would be in order for RPGs, so you could make them quite powerful with a decent amount of splash damage that could actually potentially kill a squad of enemy players, but maybe spawn the player in with fewer RPGs, so you only spawn in with 2 or 3 of them, and they're just more powerful. You could even increase the reload time, so it takes longer to fire consecutive RPGs to nerf them a little bit more, so you could justify buffing up the damage on them. Either way, I think something needs to be done about RPGs, because it just felt very awkward landing a rocket right next to somebody and basically just tickling them. After that, something I wasn't a fan of in the beta is the ability to ping enemy players when down. And the main reason I don't like this is there's no viable counterplay to this when getting pinged by somebody that you killed. You won that gunfight. You should be rewarded for winning that gunfight. But that's not how it goes. Instead, they get to ping you and reveal your location in real time, as well as all your teammates that are around you. And that doesn't seem balanced or fair to me, considering there's also no counterplay. It's not like you can shoot them again and finish them off to prevent them from pinging you, which I don't think is a great solution either. I don't think you should be able to finish off down players. But at the same time, they shouldn't have that level of power for losing a gunfight against you, and you shouldn't be punished for winning a gunfight against them. So instead, I think live pinging while down should be gone. However, I still think you should be able to ping the environment, and therefore you could still give teammates some context clues and let them know that there are enemies in the vicinity. And if an enemy is just sitting still in a corner, for instance, and you've got an eye on them, then yeah, you could ping that location and be like, there's an enemy sitting right here on my ping. I just don't think a downed player has earned the ability to live ping enemy players. After that, a fairly minor gripe, when exiting a tank, I think you should always be exiting to the rear of that tank. I notice a lot of times when popping out of a tank, you end up directly in front of it. And not only do I feel that makes no sense from a gameplay standpoint, it also doesn't make sense from a realism standpoint. Then let's talk about the frag grenade, for instance. The first thing I don't like about the frag grenade is the throw on it is way too fast. I guess that applies to the other grenades as well. To me, even as a Call of Duty player that generally likes things happening very quick and snappy and responsive, it just feels like it doesn't match the speed at which you're performing other animations, and I just don't think a grenade throw needs to be as fast as it is in the game's current state. Now, I wouldn't want to see them take this way too far in the other direction and make it painfully slow to throw a grenade, but I think a little bit of a slowdown is in order for that. And then on top of that, with the frag grenade in particular, the indicator for that grenade in the world, where it's just like a glowing red sphere, I'm not a big fan of that indicator. Not only does it often blend in with the environment far too much, it's often too small, it also doesn't give a great indicator of distance or occlusion. Meaning, I often couldn't tell if a grenade was on the other side of the wall to me or on my side of the wall, so I don't know how to react to that situation because all I'm seeing is this red circle with a wall either behind it or in front of it, but I can't really tell. That one's definitely a minor gripe, but I still feel there's room for improvement with that. And speaking of room for improvements, I think there's room for improvement when it comes to weapon balance. And I don't know if I really want to suggest any specific weapon balancing, partially because I don't believe we had access to all of the attachments that we'll have access to. We also don't have the full weapon pool to get all of the context behind that. And I don't have the back-end data that they have that would let them know how different guns were performing on a global scale. But just as one example, a gun that really stands out as just being awful in the beta, for me at least, was the EMR. I just felt like that gun was consistently shooting bullets directly through enemy players. I couldn't figure out why I was missing, and then even when you were hitting perfectly with it, I still can't see any good reason to use it, because it had often more recoil than guns that would kill significantly faster with far more forgiveness with a higher fire rate. Again, that is just one example. Overall, I just would like to see some weapon balancing take place between beta and launch, and I'm guessing we'll probably be seeing that. And that covers it for this section. I have one last section here, which is basically some quality of life features that I think would be nice to have at launch that we didn't have in the beta. The first one is I would love to see a more comprehensive scoreboard. I think the scoreboard should definitely show revives, and then potentially just support score in general. So how much score you earned repairing things, resupplying teammates, or spotting enemies. Just various actions that are outside of directly killing players that help support the team. Additionally, a quality of life feature I would love to see at launch is better heads-up display control. So let us move things around with our heads-up display. If we want to put that minimap on the top left, let us. If we want to move our compass so that it's above the minimap or even surrounding the minimap, that would be really nice as well. If we want to go with a different HUD layout that matches a previous Battlefield game, I think that would be really cool as well, to have legacy options that you could choose from. And then finally, for quality of life features, in the second weekend, I appreciated the fact that they added the custom search option, so you can select the maps and modes that you want to play, or you can deselect the ones you don't want to play. However, the issue with this is it's just a suggestion as you're searching, so if it can't find something within your filters within a reasonable amount of time, it will just plop you into whatever else is available. So a slight improvement to that I think would be nice is the ability to toggle it into a strict mode. So you could use it as it was in the second weekend, where it's basically just a suggestion and you get fast matchmaking times, or you could choose to set it to strict mode, popping up with a warning that this may increase your matchmaking time substantially, but it guarantees that you end up with a map and mode that you've actually selected. I think many people would be happy to wait an extra minute or two if it meant they were getting the maps and modes that they actually want to play. Perhaps that won't be necessary at launch with the Portal server browser having the ability to have vanilla modes with full XP, but still something I thought I'd recommend here. And there we go. That is finally going to wrap it up for my final review of the Battlefield 6 beta. Those are all the main things that came to mind as I was putting together a list. I'm sure I probably missed out on a few minor nitpicky things that I was thinking of as I was playing, but I just didn't write it down at the time, so it didn't make my list here. And this is where I want to hear from you guys in those comments down below. First off, what were your general impressions of the Battlefield 6 beta? And what other pieces of feedback that I didn't mention in today's video do you have that you would like to see adjusted for the launch of the game? Just let me know down below. If you enjoyed the video, a like rating is always appreciated. And don't forget to subscribe for more if you haven't already. I'll talk to you guys next time.